Okay, cool. So we're back in this same test file here. Nothing's changed. Still got the two buttons, the span within the container. Still using jQuery 2.03, hosted by Google, and then this test.js file. So we're just a little further down within this test.js file. And we're going to be looking at some of the methods and event methods that jQuery has enabled us to use once we select and get a jQuery object back. So just kind of the first thing here, we've got this data test attribute on Superman, or which is equal to Superman on this button. So I just want to go and grab that thing, which is this .attr. We just passed the name of whatever the attribute is. In this case, it's data test, and I'm just going to log that. So once I run this, you see it logs Superman. So that's just a simple thing to use there. So the next thing we're going to look at is this add class method, which just allows us to add a class onto something that already exists. So you'll see that all my code here is wrapped. Every time it's wrapped, just so it's happening, once the document is ready. So here we're looking at this test ID element, which here's the span. If you notice on this current page, it's black text on a white background. We've added this test style, which says change the background to black and change the text to white. So it's going to do this, when the page is ready, immediately. So we changed it up, so we can add that class. You can also remove classes. It's the same type of code. So I'm sure you can figure it out. So I just want to show here two things. One is val. So looking at this button here, button 2 has a value which is set to btn2, and you'll notice it's what's showing up here. So if I wanted to change that, I'm just going to log it real quick. So the way that you get that attribute is to say .val, and it's a function. Then I'm going to change it, which you can just pass in a new entry, new data within the same function. So if you pass it a parameter, it will set. If you don't pass it a parameter, it will get, if you're used to getters and setters. And then I'm going to go ahead and log out what that new one is, but it'll be obvious to you. It'll be on screen. So I'm going to get, set, get, but it'll be pretty obvious once this changes. So refreshing the page, you'll notice it's no longer btn2. It now says button 2. It was initially btn2. Then it got changed, as is visible here, and it's now button 2. So that's pretty straightforward one. So here's one, which is pretty cool. So right now we've got this test on screen. If I don't want it, I can just say, hey, go and grab that element and hide it. So if I were to refresh, boom, that thing's gone. And you'll notice my changes from the other code are gone as well. They're not being called anymore. And then the inverse of that is to show something if it's hidden already. If it starts off with a display hidden or display none in CSS, right? Then you can simply come in here and say show. And you'll probably want it to happen on some action, which we'll see in a minute. Kind of the actions that are available for us. So last one here, you've got this HTML. It's the equivalent of this .val, so I'm not gonna do too much with it. I'm just gonna go to this test text that we've seen, log the HTML, which is just test, and then I'm gonna change the HTML to new data. So you'll see this is now new data where the old one said test. So now we're gonna look at some of the types of actions that we can deal with, and on the page for this week, there's a link that kind of explains the differences between click, live, delegate, on, and there's another one I can't remember. I just use on most of the time, so it's kind of the de facto standard after 1.7 was released. So we'll see that here. You can really get into the nitty gritty of it on the link that I shared. Kind of breaks down, what to use where and why. The other one was bind. So here we're going to use click, which is a binding function, and it's going to bind to this ID of btn. And so when we click on btn, which is the first button on the page, it's going to throw up an alert of test. So it did. This is pretty straightforward, pretty cool. You've got like 5 extra characters here for selecting this actual ID, and then the function is just .click, and then you pass it, a function. You don't have to put this parameter in here. There's a couple parameters that are used here. You can look up what they are. I always pass E. It's by habit, so most of my functions you'll see me passing an E. So that's a simple .click. It's using the bind functionality, which has some overhead associated with it, which is one of the reasons that we're going to look into using this other method here called on. So the way that it works is the same. We get the button and we say on click. On can be used for multiple things. We're passing the event that we're interested in. On click. There's on hover. There's on double click. We're interested in click just to verify that it does the same as what our other was already doing. So I refresh the page, click my button, I again get test. So you can look up, what are all the events that you can throw in here. And one of the things that this does is, if you want to change the event that you're triggering on later, you don't have to come in and change this functionality completely, because some of the functions may not be exactly the same. Whereas here, you're using the on function. All it cares about is what you're passing in. So this is going to bind in the same fashion as this one did, because we're stating to simply bind directly to one thing here. So we can actually change that functionality by passing in the parent element to the bind to the on function. So here you'll notice, you'll notice we're actually calling container, which is the parent, on click, and then we're telling it which ID, which actual element on the page we're associating this click with, meaning that this container is just, as you've seen, it's the container holding everything on the page. So our binds will only bind up to the container, whereas here they'll bind up all the way to the document root. And it really just has to do with resources. For most of the stuff that we're going to be doing, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, if we've got one bind on a page and we've got 10 elements, what's it matter? But if you're talking about a page with 10,000 things on it and 5,000 binds, then yeah, it's going to eat up your RAM pretty quickly. So this is just a way to stop that from happening. So again, we can take a look at this one. Works the same way as the other two have. It's just a little better on resources when you're dealing with larger projects. So again, it's we're talking about the container, the parent element of whatever element we actually care about. So that's the context for that. Normally, for anything that we're going to be doing in this class, I'm just going to write them in this manner here. Exactly what I'm talking about when you click it. Right, that makes the most sense. Just wanted to cover the other one so you know that it's out there in case you start getting performance hits. Okay, so one thing that needs to be covered here before we can really even move on with some of the advanced stuff in this course is this functionality. Some of you might have seen this in other languages, but in event-driven programming, it's especially important. And it's really talking about what are we what are we referencing when we're referencing where this code came from or what this code is actually running on? So the example I've got here for you, we can just go ahead and comment this out real quick. So we got this container.onClick dot button, and I'm actually going to change it. So we're just talking about one element rather than multiple. When we say, button, and we run this function, what if we want to reference the button that it came from? Well, the way we can do that is with this. So let me just run this code, and we'll click on this button. And what it did was it logged this being this actual button that we're talking about here. And that means, what button was clicked. This one. And this one happens to refer to, when I hover over, you can tell, this actual button. Why is that useful? Well, what if you don't know what click it came from? I'm no longer referencing the direct element. I'm now referencing a class. Well, we've got multiple classes here. The same class on multiple elements. So I don't know which one is going to be clicking this. So if you'll see here, when I click this one, this button shows up. When I click this one, this button shows up. So referencing this tells us which element we're actually working with on a page. In terms of functionality, when we want to use jQuery on it, we're actually going to reference it by the $, then we're going to pass this to the function. So just a quick example of what that looks like. You'll see here the first one actually tells me, this is the actual element. The second one, no highlight or anything. This is the jQuery element. And the reason we're interested in the jQuery element is so we can use it with jQuery functions. So I'm going to pass the data test to an alert from this element. If you recall, here I've got the data test as Superman, here's Batman. So let me just run that real quick. So when I click this, it should alert me with Superman. It does. When I click this, it should alert me with Batman. And it does. And that's done dynamically within our JavaScript here by just using the this keyword and passing it into the handler here to say, hey, go get this element and give me the attribute of data test, which then comes in here and says, if you were the guy who clicked me, we're talking about Superman. If you were the guy who clicked me, we're talking about Batman. So that is the this element. And the reason that that's important is because once things start getting more complex, once we get into the that element, so I made note of this in the code, in the session notes, but some of you might not have seen this, so we'll talk about this real quick. So we've got this, which is fine if our function only never goes any deeper than what this goes of, hey, go and give me the element and do some stuff with it. But in all actuality, most of the time what happens is we have a function, right? This do on this click, run this function that has a function inside of it. So what happens then is we're going to lose the keyword of this once we get into another function, because this now takes a different meaning based on where it's called in the code. So on this initial call, you've already seen, we've already got this same code right here. On this initial call, it's going to give us where the click came from, right? It's going to be either this button or this button. But now within here, we're running another function. We're running an each function. And so if I call this, it's going to be whatever object we're iterating over within this function. It's no longer going to be where this initial button click came from. So the simple way to handle that, because we don't want to lose this information, is to simply call it that. So that, in this outer context, is equal to whatever this is here, which is the button within this inner context, that is still going to be equal to the button, but this is going to be equal to whatever we're iterating over. So just a quick function here that's going to kind of be useful as an example for what this is doing. We're going to be, anytime you click a button that has the class btn, so we've got 2 of them here, we're going to store which button it came from, and then we're going to loop over the other buttons that have this class, which, there's really only these 2. And as we loop, we are going to get their data test attribute, and we are going to change the button's HTML to include whatever it currently is, plus the other buttons attributes. So just a quick example of this. I've got a button, I click on it, it's added Superman and Batman, right? And the reason it's done that is because we've said, hey, as you loop over all these things, add on their data test attributes to what's already in this HTML from whatever button clicked this. So if I reload here, right, if I click this button, the inner HTML is currently btn. It's going to then know that I clicked this button, loop over these 2 buttons, get their data test attributes, and add them on to the end here, which it does. If I were to run it again, it'll add another Superman and Batman. It does. It's just going to do that, endlessly. If I click on this one, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. Well, the reason being that this button has a value. It doesn't have inner HTML that's being displayed. So it's happening. It's just not here on the page that you can visually see it. But this function is, in fact, running even on that second button here. So you can see, yeah, it shows that I clicked it. This one shows I clicked it, so it's showing up twice now. But you can actually see the effects here. If I click again, 3 times, just again, no effects. So that's the that and the this, and kind of like how they are going to be useful to reference where things are coming from. So the last part here is going to be chaining. And chaining just refers to the fact that you can add multiple functions here in a row without having to re-reference which element we're talking about. So just looking here at this container, I've grabbed the container element and I say when you click a button within the container, alert test 1. When you focus away from a button, focus out, alert test 2. So focus out, if I refresh here, so focusing in, if I hit tab, you'll see that it's highlighted now. When I focus out, if I hit tab again, then this test 2 comes up. Here I'm now focused in on button 2. When I focus out, test 2 comes up. And again, the other functionality here was when I click a button, it'll alert test 1. So that alerts test 1, and that alerts test 1. And again, you can see I'm back to focusing on button 1 here. When I focus out, test 2. And stop it. I keep focusing out, and so it keeps popping that. So that's funny. So that's just chaining. It just means that you could, call multiple things in a row. We could, throw something else on here. Add class of test. You can, continue adding things here. That's, one of the advantages of jQuery is that we can chain things together. So that should be enough to get you started and hopefully get you an understanding of how to kind of tackle these first assignments and have a good base to build on in jQuery. Thanks.